You are not allowed to visit this ghost town in California. It is filled with hundreds of abandoned houses completely surrounded by barbed wire fencing with many no trespassing and warning signs posted. It was mostly abandoned by the mid-1980s and to this day still has 24-hour security. Some say a deadly outbreak caused its residents to flee, while some say otherwise.
To start off our list today, we are going to take a deep dive into Dudleytown, Connecticut, also known as the town that never existed or the village of the damned. The town was settled in the 1740s and thrived for a while before falling victim to disease, crop failure, and mysterious unexplained death, which began taking place shortly after the Dudley family came to visit. Many villagers believe that the family had arrived with a curse brought from England to damn the residents of the town. So, shortly after the misfortune started, Dudleytown's abandonment began as many villagers fled for their lives in fear, which was a pretty good call, I guess, because it is said that those who stayed began to slowly descend into the realm of insanity, one by one, with many claiming to have witnessed strange creatures emerging from the forest surrounding the town. Those who enter that same forest today tell of a deafening silence that feels eerily thick and almost suffocating. Reports of aggressive animals along the town's hiking trails, desperate screams coming from the treetops, and the fact that many people and pets have mysteriously gone missing in the area over the years might be a few reasons why the town remains abandoned and illegal to enter to this day, which honestly just makes me wonder what other secrets might be hiding within its historically dark parameters.
Alright, next up we have La Noria in Chile. Now, when I describe this place, it's gonna sound like I'm exaggerating, but I'm really not. There are tons of videos of people exploring this ghost town, and it looks exactly what it sounds like when described. An incredibly creepy abandoned town with bones, some human, a lot human, scattered around the place. Open coffins, crosses everywhere. It's really quite the vibe. This place sits in the Atacama Desert. It was once a bustling mining town, but when the mines dried up, the people started new lives, but their dead were left behind. And as the years went on, people would come to this place and loot it. Even coffins would be opened up and items like jewelry they'd been buried with would be stolen. So tons of graves now sit out in the open with the bones of the dead still sitting inside of them. So it probably comes as no surprise that people will claim to see some unexplained things going on here, especially at night. Shadowy figures or even just full-bodied apparitions. And of course, the haunting sounds of the angered spirits are said to echo through the night as well.
Alrighty, next up we have an ancient town with some pretty sadistic sacrificial rituals. Well, not so much a town as a temple in a town, specifically the Moch Temple located in the northwest of Peru. The temple thrived between 100 and 800 AD. The people of the town were known for producing sophisticated goods for their time, including hand-painted pottery made from molds. They also were incredibly advanced when it came to gold working, monument construction, and city planning. While at one time the town was well known for their advancements, including their incredibly efficient irrigation systems, in 1995 they became known for something a bit different. You see, archaeologists discovered a huge sacrificial gravesite near the temple filled with the bodies of male sacrificial victims who likely did not go willingly, as it is believed many of them were travelers who met their unfortunate ends while crossing the Moche land in search of their final destinations. Murals on the walls of the temple illustrate the men's final moments, showing them naked and hogtied before being slaughtered, after which the men's skulls were turned into cups used to collect the BLOOD of the deceased so that it may be offered up as a gift to the gods. Super gross.
Next, we head over to China to discuss Kowloon Walled City. Unlike pretty much every spot on this list, I think this place would have actually been much scarier before it was abandoned. The Kowloon Walled City was this crazy, super dense, and sort of chaotic place in Hong Kong. Picture a bunch of cramped, towering buildings all squished together, a giant concrete jungle. Back in the Song Dynasty around 960 to 1279 AD, there was this cool walled garrison in Kowloon. Over time, it got kind of abandoned, and during the British colonial period, nobody really bothered about it. People just started building random structures within its walls. Fast forward to the 20th century, and it turned into this insane, unplanned mega city within a city. The buildings were like a tangled mess of staircases, pipes, and wires. It became famous for being overcrowded, and it was also basically lawless. The only ones really governing the place were the triads. It was tons of crime, and it was very dark. Because of how dense the place was, it was hard for natural light to even reach the lower levels of the city, so people had to go to the roofs of their buildings to get any light. Eventually, in the 90s, the Hong Kong government decided the place needed to go, and demolition began in March of 1993. Today, though, some of the ruins still remain.
Next up, we've got the Bangar Fort, located in Rajasthan, India. The small town was built in the 17th century by an emperor named Madho Singh as a testament of love to his son Man Singh. At its peak, the town was home to over 10,000 people. Today, living in the town is prohibited. And while tourists and locals may visit the ruins during the day, they are strictly banned from entering the area before sunrise and after sunset. And this is because of the fact that since Bangar Fort's re-establishment as an unaltered landmark in the 21st century, people who have entered the premises during these times have often heard or seen dark spirits. And those who have gone into the forts have either turned up dead or just not turned up at all. Because of this, each night before the sun sets, the forts and the grounds are evacuated, locked, and guarded. This is also why the area has earned the title of most haunted place in India. Many believe the haunting is due to a curse placed on the town during its peak by hermit Baba Balu, who was living in the area at the time. Shortly after he declared his curse, a devastating earthquake hit the town, causing its people, along with the people from 83 surrounding villages, to vanish overnight.
Next on the list is Poveglia Island in Italy. This place has a rather ominous nickname, Ghost Island, and that's not just because nobody lives there. This island is basically a mix of a former hospital and a big giant graveyard. So back in the day, during the bubonic plague in the 1700s, which was a very fun time, they used Poveglia as a quarantine spot. It was the place you'd get dumped when you were really sick. And then later on, they built a mental hospital there. So it went from a plague quarantine spot, pretty dark already, to a place where even more horrible things happened because mental hospitals were never pleasant and the inmates were never treated well. The hospital eventually closed in the 60s, and the island's been abandoned ever since. So many people died on this island that half of the soil is apparently made up of their remains, which is just wild. Today, the island is completely off limits because for some reason, people need to be told not to go to a place like this.
Next up, we've got Caldara, yet another town in Rajasthan, India, with a pretty sordid past. It is said that around 300 years ago, Caldara was quite a prosperous village where townsfolk lived happily and, despite the area's dry agriculture, were able to grow incredibly abundant crops throughout the years. It wasn't until the arrival of a debaucherous Prime Minister, Salem Singh, that things started to go downhill. When Salem arrived in the town, he set his sights on a beautiful young woman. He claimed he would marry her by any means necessary, including force. He warned the villagers that any attempt to protect the girl and thwart the marriage would result in grave consequences for their lands. And so, the villagers basically said screw it. The entire population of the town, including the young woman that Salem had hoped to marry, left Caldara, but not before they put a dark curse on its barren lands, ensuring that Salem would never be able to reap the ill-earned rewards of what the villagers had sown. To this date, the small town of Caldara remains abandoned, in almost the same state it had been left in so many years ago, minus the fruitful harvests, of course. Those who have visited the ancient grounds have told of dark forces that they feel are determined to protect the uninhabitable status of the area as per the villagers' curse, which had been designed so that no one would ever be able to settle in the area again.
Next on the list, we have the largest contaminated site in the southern hemisphere, Wittenoom, in Western Australia. This town was surrounded by asbestos mines. There were rich asbestos deposits in the surrounding hills, and back in the day, asbestos was in high demand, being used in construction as a fire resistant and for insulation. So the town grew pretty rapidly as miners and their families settled in the area. Wittenoom was a bumping community. There were schools, shops, a movie theater, but As the years went on and concerns about the health risks associated with asbestos exposure began to be a thing, it became pretty obvious that people were living in a death trap. By the 60s and 70s, the health hazards of asbestos became a well-known thing and the demand for it really dried up. The Whitnum mine closed in 1966, which had pretty much been the sole source of income for the town, and on top of that, the negative health effects were starting to become pretty apparent. By the 2000s, the town had officially been shut down and only a handful of holdouts remained, but as of 2022, there's no one left. And in 2023, the place started getting demolished completely.
Okay, next on our list today we have Cinco Saltos, an Argentinian town with a pretty dark past, obviously. The area in which the town resides receives very little sunlight, providing it with a quite fittingly dark and gloomy aura year-round. On many occasions, Cinco Saltos has been referred to as the City of Witches, this being largely due to the fact that, historically, many residents of the area had been dedicated practitioners of black magic, namely necromancy and witchcraft. It is said that in ancient times, witches would often perform occult rituals in the town. One of the more commonly performed was a ritualistic sacrifice of young men and women on the Pellegrini Lake that ran through the center of the town. It is said that to this day, anyone who stands near the lake at night comes to know the disembodied screams of the many victims said to have lost their lives by the river so long ago.
And lastly, we have probably the most apocalyptic looking place on the list, Centralia in Pennsylvania. The town's streets are cracked and smoke constantly rises from the ground. It's hard to believe this place actually exists. It looks like a set from The Walking Dead, but that's because a coal mine fire has been burning beneath the town since 1962. The story begins with a landfill fire, but that was intentionally ignited near an abandoned coal mine entrance. Unfortunately, the fire unexpectedly spread to the coal mines beneath the town, creating a continuous underground blaze that just hasn't stopped, and this has caused some problems, primarily all the sinkholes. Imagine a sinkhole opening up with fire spewing out of it, like you'd think you were literally being dragged into hell. So yeah, people don't live here anymore, shocker. Most of the buildings have now been demolished. In the 80s, the US government allocated funds to relocate the remaining residents, and the local zip code was discontinued.
And is Maple Hill Cemetery. Founded in 1822, this cemetery is the oldest and largest burial ground in the state, where roughly 80,000 people have been laid to rest. But with that many souls in one place, it only takes a matter of time before people start noticing something strange happening. While during the day, you may be spared from witnessing a horrifying spirit, it's said at night the tortured souls are unearthed, roaming the grounds in search of answers. Most unsettling is the park on the property, also known as the Dead Playground. Oh gee, that sounds inviting, don't you think? Apparently it's nicknamed that as many young people are buried in the area, and visitors brave enough to see for themselves what goes on claim that at night the trapped souls of the young can be seen playing around the park, while their creepy giggles echo throughout the grounds. But whatever you do, make sure you pay respect to Mary Bibb. If you knock on her mausoleum walls, she will reply with a gentle creak of her rocking chair buried inside, but if you forget to greet her, well, she just might haunt you forever. Coming in at number 9 is Fort Morgan. Said to be one of the most haunted places in all of Alabama, Fort Morgan is rife with ghoulish tales of ghosts and strange occurrences. The most notorious is that of a prisoner who's said to have died here in the early 1900s after he took his own life in the barracks. People say that if you walk past, you can still hear him crying out late at night, but he's not the only one you should fear. There's also a female spirit that wanders the grounds in search of justice after she too lost her life after being dragged into the fort and beaten to death by mysterious attackers who were never caught for the crime. Many believe she is an angry spirit with a vengeance who will torture any man who steps foot on the property. So if I were you, I'd skip this one. Next up at number 8 is Drish House. Once the home of Dr. John R. Marsh, a gambler and a drunk who built the estate in 1835 for his beloved bride Sarah. The couple lived in the home for 32 years until one day John had too much to drink for the last time and drunkenly tumbled over the stairway, falling to his demise. But you might be surprised that it's not his spirit that's trapped here, actually his wife Sarah. While no one knows for sure what keeps her her soul trapped on the property. Some say she was so traumatized after finding her husband dead in their home and wasn't able to recover. Others believe, however, that she refuses to leave because her family failed to honor her own funeral wishes, and so she remains, causing trouble to anyone who steps foot on the property to this day. While today the manor is used for many celebrations, Sarah remains, tormenting guests of the events, trying to get them to leave. If you're brave enough to visit, try looking up at the third-story tower. It says you can catch a glimpse of her up there. Just be careful she doesn't see you looking, or she may just follow you around the property, terrorizing you until you leave. Next up at number 7, the Old Bryce Hospital. There are few places in this world more haunted than an old abandoned mental health facility, and there is no denying that the torment that went on here is a huge reason as to why so many spirits remain haunting its grounds, seeking revenge. Built during the segregation era of America, the building was branded as an insane asylum for those suffering from mental illnesses, when in reality it was pretty much a work camp for able-bodied black people who were admitted under false pretenses and then forced into slave labor, working in the fields around the hospital. Shockingly, the facility remained open until 1977 and only closed due to new desegregation laws. It comes as no surprise that after years of abuse and inhumane living conditions suffered by the so-called patients, that people claim to have had strange experiences while visiting. Those who've dared to visit the abandoned hospital claim the souls are angry, and that as soon as you walk in, you can feel the air shift. Many report hearing strange noises, and some even claim to have seen shadowy figures lurking around every corner. Next up at number 6 is St. James Hotel. For whatever reason, hotels tend to be a pretty big hotspot for paranormal encounters, and the St. James Hotel is definitely a part of that phenomenon. Back in the day it was the first hotel operated by a black congressman, and despite having many years of success, it hit hard times in the late 1800s and was eventually forced to close its doors to the public. Fast forward about 100 years to 1997 and the hotel reopened, but this time something was off about the building. Something just wasn't right. During its century-long time as an abandoned building, it became a horrifying hub for lost souls, and I guess they decided to remain, haunting all those that dare stay the night. Visitors claim seeing full-bodied apparitions sitting at the bar, or witness lights shutting off out of nowhere. But most creepy of all was a recorded visit when a psychic research team was brought in, and they walked the grounds asking if anyone was there, but they never heard a response back. But later on, when they played the tapes, an older man's voice responded saying, "Well, that's a stupid question," making everyone in the room jump. So, what do you say? Are you brave enough to pay the ghosts a visit? Coming in at number 5, Cahaba Ghost Town. It likely comes as no surprise that a ghost town is also home to thousands of unsettling spirits, but few are more terrifying than Cahaba. Once the capital city of Alabama, it was abandoned after the Civil War when terrible flooding led to most of the buildings falling into complete disrepair, and so the citizens who survived were forced to leave for good. Today, nothing remains but the ruins of what used to be, including a church, a few cemeteries, and the Barker Mansion and its slave quarters. And I mean, that is just all the ingredients for a haunted ghost town if I've ever heard of one. Those that have tried to visit the once booming city recount that as soon as you enter the town's borders, cell service gets spotty and unreliable, only to be completely fine as soon as you step even 1 foot off the border of the town. While that alone might not scare visitors away, there are also countless reports of visitors witnessing terrifying apparitions and hearing the voices of the dead crying out at night for revenge. So visit at your own risk, but don't say I didn't warn you. Coming in at number 4 is the Boynton Oak. Of all the things that are usually haunted, like cemeteries, hospitals, churches, the last thing you'd likely expect to need to be afraid of was a tree. But trust me, this is no ordinary tree. The Boynton Oak is said to have grown from the grave of one Mr. Charles Boynton. As the legend goes, back in 1835, Charles was accused of friend Nathaniel Frost. Charles disputed the accusation and never once wavered from his alleged innocence. Still, he was found guilty for the crime and sentenced to execution as payback. But right before he was executed, he declared in front of everyone that a tree would spring forth from his grave as a proof of his innocence, and then they would all see that they had caught the wrong man. And shockingly, this is exactly what happened. Many claim that Charles's spirit haunts the tree above his grave, often freaking out those who come to visit. Even spookier is that some claim to have even seen him sitting under the tree waiting. But just who is he waiting for? No one knows exactly. Coming in at number 3 is Sloss furnaces. Once built as a means to access iron ore, coal, and limestone, the Sloss furnaces were far from a safe place to work. It's believed over the years at least 47 men lost their lives working at the furnaces due to the incredibly dangerous work conditions. But the most talked about is that of James Slag Wormwood, a former foreman of the furnaces known for being cruel to his employees and who died after slipping and falling into a pool of molten iron ore. Although there is rumor he may have been pushed by his workers, forced to the brink after his unending abuse. Still, after Wormwood's death, strange things started happening more and more frequently. Workers were seeing strange things, hearing strange noises, and started to feel like they were going crazy. Employees were being found injured or seen tripping and falling out of nowhere. Each of them recounted that an angry man covered in burns had tried to push them after screaming at them to get back to work. Then in 1971, a watchman encountered what he described as a half-man, half-demon who tried to push him up the stairs. After the watchman refused the spirit's advance, he was badly beaten by the entity until he fell unconscious. Later, while being examined, he was found to be covered in severe burns where he says he was beaten. So unless you're looking to be beaten up by an angry spirit and covered in burns from the blows, I might suggest a different place for your visit. Coming in at number 2 is Bear Creek Swamp. Even at the best of times, swamps give off spooky and creepy vibes, and this one might just be the worst of them all. Legend has it that many years ago, a woman's son went missing. Scared, the mother went looking for him in the nearby swamp, hoping that he had simply run away from home. But no matter how long she looked, she could never find him. It said she died in the swamp looking for him, and if you walk into the swamp today and say, "We have your baby," 3 times, she will come out of nowhere and attack you until you leave for good. And don't even try to come back after she's banished you. You might not be so lucky the second time around. And last up today in our number 1 spot is Sweetwater Mansion. Designed by war vet General John Brahan, this mansion was named after the nearby creek and first occupied by the general's son-in-law, Robert Patton. Under Patton's jurisdiction, the basement of the mansion served as a Civil War hospital and a county jail. And if that wasn't enough, it's said that at one point someone who lived in the mansion practiced dark magic, which thinned the veil between worlds. This would make sense considering just how many people have witnessed earth-shattering apparitions that sent them running for the hills. Most notably is the casket that contains a body of a Confederate soldier in one of the downstairs rooms that will suddenly disappear right in front of your eyes. It's believed that the casket is haunted by the spirit of original owner Robert Patton, whose funeral was held at the home and who was documented having an open casket ceremony. But that's not even the scariest part. There's a room on the property that routinely locks female visitors inside. In fact, it happens so frequently that caretakers of the property have avoided entering it at all costs. And if a self-locking door and a terrifying soldier ghost don't turn you off of the property, there is also a secret room on the property with no door. The only way to enter is by a small window, and it's believed that anyone who goes in will never escape. So if I were you, I'd skip this one.
Noom in Australia. So Witten out here, it must be creepy, right? Right. The island had a population of just over 5,000 at its peak in 1959. Many people living here were working out. You can see more of the town emerging from the water than ever. 25 years after it disappeared, it began to re-emerge, only this time white and stripped of paint, and a lot of quite possibly irreparable damage. The trees have even died after their time away from the sun, leaving ghostly, chalky-looking twisted roots and leafless branches withering in the ground. Rusted cars. The village of Oradan-sur-Glane was the subject of a bloody massacre. On June 10th, a population of almost 50,000, Pripyat was evacuated in a day. Now this left hospitals, railways, homes, restaurants, shops and amusement parks in total abandonment. Now 30 years on from the disaster, the elements have started to claim the buildings, with grass and trees growing through them. This radiation-ravaged city looks set to stand as a sad reminder of the disaster that ultimately claimed over 4,000 lives.
Originally known as Forest City, was once a very popular mining town in Colorado. They had about 2,000 people living there when the mines opened. However, in the early 1920s, the mining industry started to decline, and slowly people packed up and left. However, it's not completely abandoned. Apparently, a couple of people still live there, but it's said that this place is haunted. In fact, it's said that it is home to some of the most paranormal activity in the state. Maybe it's a good spot for paranormal investigators, but not the best area to live in. I mean, I wouldn't want ghosts for neighbors. I mean, maybe I would, if they were friendly ghosts that kept noise levels down, then sure. Moving on at number 9, we have Krakow, Italy. Krakow, Italy was founded in the 8th century. However, it now lays abandoned due to a series of destructive natural disasters. The first natural disaster occurred in 1963 when a bunch of landslides affected the area. This was a result of the city being built on a cliff 1,300 feet off of the ground, and they also had some sewer and water system issues. Then in 1972, a flood struck the area and made the whole situation worse. Then in 1980, there was an earthquake that left the city completely abandoned. Now, the only people you may catch there are film crews. It's a very popular filming location. Some scenes in the film Quantum of Solace were shot there. But the area itself is considered a ticking time bomb, and it's surrounded by a locked gate. Making our way down the list at number 8, we have the city underwater. You aren't going to be able to visit this next city unless you have access to scuba diving gear, because this city is now completely submerged underwater. Built 1,300 years ago, the city I'm referring to is Shai-Chang, also referred to as Lion City, and it's located in eastern China. In 1959, the city was purposely flooded to build a hydroelectric power station. Now it's referred to as China's Atlantis. What's pretty fascinating is that although it lays about 40 meters underwater, the buildings are still in pretty good shape. The only change is instead of having human residents, it's home to tons of aquatic life. Moving on to number 7, we have Cahaba, Alabama. Cahaba in Alabama was abandoned after suffering from seasonal flooding. In 1865, Cahaba was destroyed by a flood and then abandoned. After the flood, living there became relatively impossible, so residents had no choice but to leave. But then in the 1920s, an archaeologist started to uncover and preserve some of the structures. Now it's said that the area is very haunted. In fact, it's known for a ghostly orb that can be seen floating around only to vanish into thin air. So the citizens may no longer live there, but ghosts certainly do. In our 6th spot, we have Varosha, Cyprus. In the early 70s, Varosha was one of the most popular tourist attractions in the world. That was until 1974 when Turkey invaded Cyprus. As a result, the residents there fled for their lives. Some residents have told stories of pots being left on their stoves or things still left in their ovens. It's quite sad how they were forced out of their own home and not allowed to return. Since 1974, Varosha has been abandoned and under control of the Turkish military. The whole area is now fenced off and under constant supervision. If you try to break in, well, the army patrols have orders to shoot on sight. So don't even try to visit the city, it definitely will end badly. It's just such a shame because the area is beautiful. In fact, actress Elizabeth Taylor loved going there. We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Plymouth, Montserrat. Plymouth, once the capital of Montserrat in the Caribbean, is often referred to as Pompeii of the Caribbean. Why? Well, in 1996, a volcano erupted, causing a mass evacuation. A few months later, some residents returned, but were welcomed with another eruption. On June 25th, 1997, this eruption killed 19 residents and destroyed the island's airport, trapping many others from fleeing. Eventually, Plymouth was evacuated again, but this time, no one dared to return. Everything was destroyed. In fact, 80% of the town is currently covered in ash. Pictures show homes completely buried with only their roofs sticking out. It's quite sad and scary. Moving on to number 4, we have Centralia. Centralia is an abandoned town located in Pennsylvania. It was once a populated town, however, a lot of residents were forced to leave due to unsafe living conditions. This all started after a coal fire ignited underground. This fire has been burning for almost 50 years. And it's predicted to continue on for another 200 years. As a result of this fire, tons of sinkholes have formed, hot smoke is released underground, and carbon monoxide has filled some residents' basements. In some parts of the town, it's said that the ground beneath them have reached up to 900 degrees Fahrenheit, which is about 400 degrees Celsius for us Canadians. Now, the US government is trying to erase any history of this city. They took away any signs directing people to this town, removed the town's zip code, and forced most of the residents out, except for 7 residents that are happy living in their deadly town and refuse to move out. In our 3rd spot, we have the Island of Dolls, aka the island I never want to visit. Located in Mexico City, the Island of Dolls is full of dolls hanging from trees and buildings. If that's not bad enough, these dolls have been there for so long that they are covered in dirt, cobwebs, and insects, making them look that much more terrifying. Now, you're probably wondering how this place came to be. Clearly, it's not Annabelle or Chucky's private island resort, though it could be. So back in the 1950s, a man named Don Julian started to hang dolls from trees as a way to protect himself against evil spirits. Paranormal things kept happening to him there, so he would hang dolls everywhere with the idea that they would scare the souls of the deceased. He spent more than 50 years hanging dolls. Some were found in the garbage, some were missing limbs. Did not matter. If it was a doll, it got hung up all around the island. Now it's abandoned and looks like something straight out of a horror movie. Coming in at number 2, we have Wittenoom, Australia. Located north-northeast of Perth, Australia, Wittenoom is considered one of Australia's deadliest towns. And you would think it would have to do with Australia's massive and deadly insects, but surprisingly not. In fact, it's because of its blue asbestos. In 1937, blue asbestos was discovered in the city's gorge. Years later, miners were unearthing tons of asbestos from the ground. It wasn't until 1978 that the government started pushing people out of their homes. They realized how deadly it was for them to be living there. It was increasing their risk for cancer. And in some cases, people were already developing lung cancer just from living there. It would cost the town about $2.43 million to rid the town of asbestos. So instead of doing that, they just shut the town down completely. In 2006, the government turned off the power to the town and had its name removed from maps and road signs. In fact, all roads that once led to the town are now closed off. If you do choose to enter the town, you will find tons of huge warning signs advising you to turn back. And in our number 1 spot, we have Pripyat, Ukraine. This is probably the most famous abandoned city on the list. So Pripyat was a city in Ukraine that had a population of 49,000 individuals. However, on April 27, 1986, all residents were forced to evacuate following the Chernobyl disaster. Pripyat was the most affected by the Chernobyl nuclear disaster since they were the closest to the power plant. They were the ones most exposed to the radioactive chemicals. A once beautiful city was left abandoned in just 3 hours. Due to the radiation, the city will be left untouched for thousands of more years until it's safe enough to return.
We're starting off our trip to the Golden State with the Gates of Hell in Hacienda Heights. What is known as the Gates of Hell is this big barbed wire fence surrounding a piece of property that is rumored to have been a sanatorium back in the 40s. The story goes that this hospital had been shut down due to malpractice. And there are other stories that the building beyond this fence was the home of Satan worshippers who practiced all kinds of dark rituals on the property. As to how this rumor got started, well, beyond this ominous barbed wire fence is the back entrance to a building. Those few who have managed to sneak a glimpse of it have apparently seen all sorts of pentagrams and cultish symbols drawn all over it, and peeking inside the windows, you can supposedly see red stains covering the inside. Now, these could just be nothing more than made-up stories, but many people claim to have this uneasy feeling that washes over them when they pass by this gate. There has to be some reason for that barbed wire keeping people out, or maybe it's there to keep something in. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. By the way, we have awesome content coming your way on the daily. Alright, the notorious Bohemian Grove. Bohemian Grove is a private campground located in Monte Rio, California. It's known for hosting an annual invite-only retreat for members of the Bohemian Club, a private men's club that only allows highfalutin men from fields in politics, business, and the arts. Now, the area isn't always closed off to the public, just when this annual gathering takes place. And what goes on in these gatherings at Bohemian Grove is incredibly secretive. And there are very strict rules in place for members about maintaining this secrecy. The most famous event at Bohemian Grove is said to be the cremation of care ceremony, which is a symbolic ritual performed in front of a large owl-shaped statue. Nobody, other than the members, of course, know what this ritual entails. But you have a bunch of powerful people meeting in the middle of the woods in secret performing ceremonies. No surprise why most people on the outside find this incredibly suspect. I don't know. Let your mind go wild. Do they sacrifice a poor person every year and then drink their blood while dancing in the nude around the big owl statue? That's what I picture. I picture Wicker Man type stuff going on. Like, what needs to be so secret about a camping trip? I've never been roasting marshmallows and catching fish in the woods with my buddies and turned to them and been like, guys, this stays in the woods here. None of this gets out. Alright, the hidden city under Mount Shasta. Now, unlike everything else you'll see on this list, this place is only rumored to exist, but the story behind it is pretty fascinating. According to the legend, there's said to be this hidden underground city or a network of tunnels beneath the majestic Mount Shasta in Northern California. There are a few different versions of this legend, but the gist is that there's this hidden city inhabited by an advanced and enlightened civilization. Some say they're remnants of an ancient civilization, extraterrestrial beings, or even spiritually advanced beings known as Lemurians. Lemuria is a mythical lost continent in the Pacific, kinda in the same vein as Atlantis, and according to the legend, Lemurians found refuge in the tunnels beneath the mountain after their continent sank into the ocean. There have also been a good number of UFO sightings around Mount Shasta, and people who have claimed to actually encounter the underground city, like the prospector J.C. Brown, who claimed to discover the city back in 1904. He said he'd found a cave that sloped down 11 miles while prospecting for gold, and inside the cave he found an entire city filled with gold and artifacts like shields and weapons, even the remains of large mummified humanoids, some of which were 10 feet tall. Brown didn't come out with his story until years later, telling a man named John C. Root about his tale. John gathered a search team, but on the day the group was supposed to meet, J.C. Brown apparently didn't show up. Not only that though, he was never seen or heard from again. So, I don't know, did he actually show up? And they went down there, they found the stuff, and then they were like, we want the gold to ourselves, and like, took him out, maybe? Who knows? Next on the list is Ano Nuevo Island. This place hasn't always been an island. It used to be connected to the mainland through a narrow strip of land that acted as a bridge, but water levels rose, eventually cutting it off. All that sits on this piece of land now are a handful of abandoned buildings and the residence, which used to be the home of a lighthouse keeper. The lighthouse is gone now, but the keeper is said to still linger in the afterlife anyway. The island is completely abandoned and off limits, now a protected wildlife preserve, home to seals and sea lions, but some say But on certain nights, they've seen the windows of the old lighthouse keeper's home light up as if someone or something still looms over the island, keeping watch. In the LA suburb of Downey sits a fenced-off, boarded-up set of homes and buildings known as the Old LA County Poor Farm. The history of this place dates back to 1887, when the LA County Board of Supervisors decided to create a facility for the homeless. They bought 124 acres of farmland near Downey, functioned as a place for them to stay but also to work. It was a working farm with buildings to house residents, offices, and even common areas. Over the years, the farm expanded to around 400 acres by 1910 and produced a variety of crops and livestock. It was a self-sustaining operation, providing food for residents and selling all the excess produce for profit. Like, what an awesome idea. We need stuff like this today. Things eventually changed, of course, though. In 1915, a new superintendent took charge. The Great Depression also brought its challenges, with funding drying up and a tent city being constructed. During World War II, part of the place became an army base, and after the war, the facility evolved into a hospital, abandoning the farm aspect by the 50s. And then by the 80s, the aging hospital moved to a new facility across the street, leaving the old poor farm abandoned. It's now completely off limits to the public, surrounded by no trespassing signs and barbed wire fences. Creepy story though. In 2006, the military came to the area for a training exercise, and Marines stumbled upon a freezer containing tons of mummified body parts, likely from the hospital, but that's still really creepy. The Point Sur Lighthouse is surrounded by ghostly tales. It was constructed in 1889, helping to navigate vessels along the Big Sur coastline. One tale about this place is that the original lighthouse keeper continues to watch over the tower till this day. Future keepers have had the creepy experience of being all alone in the tower at night, only to hear labored footsteps ascending the stairs and the sounds of huffs and puffs coming from the stairs. But when they've called out to ask who's there or to go and look, the stairway is completely empty. There are also stories about a woman in a vintage dress wandering near the lighthouse, and some say she's the spirit of a woman who died in a shipwreck. Next on the list is the Lincoln Heights Jail. This was a pretty notorious jail. Big names like Al Capone used to be housed here. The jail has been around since 1931. It was originally constructed to hold about 625 prisoners, but by the 50s, it was packing in about 2,800 folks. You can only imagine what the conditions were like in that place. And in the 50s and 60s, when LA was cracking down on LGBT activity, the place became known for something else. Cops were going after queer individuals, making arrests, and the prison had its own separate wing just for these prisoners. In 1965, the city decided to shut the facility down. It sat empty for ages, with people tossing around ideas for renovations, a trade school, a rooftop garden. In 1979, the Bilingual Foundation for the Arts moved in, but by 2014, it was abandoned yet again. Fast forward to 2017, the city wanted ideas to revive the place. The Lincoln Property Company and 15 Group got the nod to turn it into a Lincoln Heights Makers District. Public market, amphitheater, all that kind of jazz, but the place ended up being really tough to renovate. It was full of hazardous material, decay, and getting the place up to current environmental standards was tough. So the project was ultimately abandoned, and the place still sits empty to this day. Next up, we have the Sunken City. This spot is completely off limits to the public, although you probably wouldn't think it with how many people fart around in the place. The Sunken City is located in San Pedro and got its name in 1929 when a landslide caused a part of the coastline to plunge into the ocean. This left behind this series of concrete foundations, streets, and sidewalks that now sit below the cliffs. The area became popular for how eerie and surreal the landscape is. Even though it's been technically closed off to the public since '87, because of safety concerns, people were climbing the unstable cliffs and it became a liability. You're not supposed to go wandering around there, and the city has to put up fences and signs to make sure everyone gets the message. Trespassing can result in fines or even arrests, but people continue to sneak in. When I say people, I mean like young people. Let's be real. It looks beautiful though. There's palm trees, really cool looking graffiti. I get why people would want to check it out, but apparently it can be pretty dangerous. Forget the fines, people often get mugged here or worse. Let's talk about Murphy Ranch, sitting in the hills near Los Angeles. So back in the 30s, a couple with some pretty unconventional ideas decided to build a self-sufficient compound there. And by unconventional ideas, I mean, they were incredibly anti-Semitic. They thought the world was headed for some major chaos, and seeing as World War II was looming, kinda was, so they built this compound, which ended up becoming something of a base for American Third Reich sympathizers during the Second World War. The compound had living quarters, a power station, and even a water storage system. It was a haven for them, and other like-minded pricks, but the US government got wind of it and shut it down in 1941, the day after the Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor. The remains of Murphy Ranch now sit completely abandoned and completely off limits. Old dilapidated buildings and graffiti-covered walls are all that remain. Yes, graffiti, people still do sneak in. Next on the list we have Alcatraz. This is one of the most notorious former prisons in the entire world. The amount of stories about this place is damn near endless, and it's said that some of the former prisoners still linger within the building till this day. Back in the 1850s, it started as a military setup, housing soldiers, but then in 1934, it switched gears and became a high-security prison, holding big-name crooks like Al Capone and George Machine Gun Kelly. Life on Alcatraz was no joke for inmates. They faced solitary confinement, hard labor, and punishment was incredibly tough. On top of that, the place was said to be this impossible area to escape, being out in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by ice-cold water. Oddly enough, though, there were actually multiple escape attempts here, a whopping 14 to be exact. The most famous attempt was in 1962 when Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers disappeared into thin air. Some say they actually made it to shore, started new lives in secret, but others think they drowned in the frigid water. Others who tried weren't as lucky. Guards shot some or just caught him before they even got that far. Ami, Japan. This town in Fukushima Prefecture once housed 20,000 residents, but in one night, in March of 2011, the most destructive earthquake in Japanese history hit off the coast. This caused a massive tsunami that hit a nearby power plant. After 3 meltdowns and widespread nuclear fallout, the residents were forced to evacuate. The town was completely abandoned for a year until April of 2012, when residents were allowed to slowly make their way back in, but only in 2 designated zones. Zone 3 was completely off limits and still remains so to this very day. There have been many attempts to try and rebuild the town into what it once was. Rents have been reduced. There's even been plans to build a Pokemon-themed theme park, but most people just don't want to go anywhere near the place based on the radioactive contamination, which is understandable. Number 9. Kantubek, Uzbekistan. This abandoned town sits on Vozrozdanya Island and was abandoned in 1992 after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. This town was built to house about 1,500 people. Most of its residents were scientists working at a top-secret USSR biological weapons testing site. This place became an absolute nightmare following a couple, little accidents that left a number of people infected with smallpox. After a field test went wrong, 2 people ended up dying. Then about a year later, 2 fishermen were found dead, likely from the bubonic plague that had leaked out of the testing facility. Then antelopes started keeling over and dying. Dead fish were being hauled out of the sea in big nets. The island became a dumping ground for anthrax in the 80s until the lab was finally closed down, with the town becoming deserted by 1992. Apparently there's plans to turn the area into a national park. I would not go anywhere near this place. In 2002, there was a US-led expedition to neutralize the anthrax because they were scared that possible bad people were going to try and get their hands on it. Even still though, I don't know, just let bygones be bygones. Radioactive, is it ever fully gone? And at number 8, we have Craco, Italy. Man, this place looks beautiful. Just wanted to start by saying that. There's definitely an eeriness with abandoned towns, but this one has such a majestic quality about it. It doesn't look all depressing and gray like an abandoned city you'd see in Russia or something. So, Craco is a historic hilltop town located in the Basilicata region of southern Italy. Its history dates back to the 8th century when it was founded by the Greeks. The town prospered during the medieval period when its economy based on agriculture and craftsmanship, but in the 20th century, Craco faced a number of issues. In 1963, a landslide forced many residents to abandon their homes and relocate to a nearby valley. There were also earthquakes in 1972 and 1980, which further damaged the town's infrastructure, making it basically uninhabitable. The Italian government declared Craco a ghost town, and the remaining residents were forced to leave due to safety concerns. Today, the town stands as this hauntingly beautiful shell of what it once was. The buildings are crumbling, the streets are empty, at least when tourists aren't visiting. The town's also been used for a filming location for a number of movies, most notably Quantum of Solace. Next on the list is Wittenoom, Australia. This is just a very sad story. So, this town was built in 1947 in Pilbara, Western Australia, housed 20,000 residents, and was bustling with life. At one point, they had a movie theater, 2 schools, a hotel. The parents of most of the families living there, though, worked in the nearby Blue Asbestos Mine. This was a time where people didn't know how harmful asbestos was. By the mid-60s, though, it became a known thing and the mine was shut down and a lot of residents up and left. The thing is, they'd already been exposed to it for so long, over 2,000 of these former residents would go on to die of asbestos-related illnesses. The area has now become known as Australia's Chernobyl. Number 6, Pyramiden. Pyramiden in Svalbard, Norway was once a thriving Soviet coal mining settlement established in 1910 by Sweden. It was later sold to the Soviet Union in 1927. The town's name translates to the pyramid in various languages, named after the pyramid-shaped mountain nearby. During its peak, Pyramiden housed a significant population. The town's economy relied heavily on coal mining, and it continued to operate under Soviet management until the early 90s. But in 98, Pyramiden was abruptly abandoned when mining ceased. The residents left behind buildings, possessions, and remnants of this once vibrant community, and today Pyramiden stands frozen in time as a ghost town. And the harsh Arctic climate has preserved the town remarkably well. Buildings remain standing, showcasing this Soviet-era architecture and interiors, and the town's infrastructure, including the swimming pool, school, cultural center, still eerily intact. And at number 5, Bannock, Montana. This abandoned town in Beaverhead County, Montana was founded in 1862 after the discovery of gold in Grasshopper Creek. It quickly became a booming mining town, attracting thousands of prospectors and settlers seeking fortune in the gold fields. With the prospect of wealth, though, came a ton of violence and lawlessness. In 1863, the infamous Plummer Gang, led by Henry Plummer, became the town's sheriff, secretly organizing a gang of outlaws who terrorized the area. There were a series of robberies, stagecoach holdups, violent deaths happened as a result. The citizens, fed up with this rampant crime, formed the Vigilance Committee, which eventually captured and hanged over 20 members of this gang, including Plummer, in a single night. Shootouts, barroom brawls, other violent incidents, it was just happening all the time here back in the day. It was your classic Wild West town. But as the gold reserves dwindled and new mining opportunities came about in other places, the town's population started to decline. Today, Bannock stands as this well-preserved ghost town with over 60 historic structures remaining, including houses, saloons, and a schoolhouse. Because of its violent history, though, some visitors and locals believe the place to be haunted. Numerous ghost stories and paranormal encounters have been reported over the years. Next on the list, we have Frisco in Beaver County, Utah. This was a mining town that boomed in the late 19th century. Established in the 1870s, it was named after the San Francisco Mountains. The miners extracted silver, lead, and zinc from nearby mines. During its heyday, Frisco was notorious for its lawlessness and violence. The town earned a reputation as one of the wildest mining camps in the West. Shootouts, brawls, and other violent things were common. At one point, multiple men would die violently on a nightly basis. I've heard up to 12, which is insane. I don't know if that's true. 12 a night? How would you even have people left after like a month? But anyway, but as the mines were depleted and economic opportunities started to die down, the town's population began to decline. By the 1920s, the place was mostly abandoned. It's now a complete ghost town with abandoned structures, crumbling homes, and decaying industrial facilities. Number 3. Centralia, Pennsylvania. Centralia used to be a lively, you guessed it, coal mining town in Columbia County. Back in the mid-1800s, coal mining really kicked off and the town prospered through the late 19th and early 20th centuries, but trouble began in 1962 when a fire started in the coal mines beneath the town. Nobody knows exactly how it began, but it's believed to have started in a landfill, an abandoned strip mine pit. Efforts to put out the fire failed, and it kept burning underground. By the 80s, it became clear the situation was just dire. Carbon monoxide was seeping from the fire. The government stepped in, and in '84 a law was passed to move Centralia's residents. Most buildings were torn down, and people were relocated to nearby towns. Even today, though, like smoke and toxic gases continue to rise from the ground. It's very apocalyptic looking. In its second place, we have St. Elmo, Colorado. St. Elmo is a ghost town located in Chaffee County, Colorado. Founded in the late 1800s, St. Elmo was once a thriving mining town, mostly focusing on gold and silver mining. There was a general store, hotels, saloons. Over the years, as mining activities started to die down, residents left St. Elmo, and by the 1920s, the town became mostly abandoned. But today, many of its original buildings still stand. This place is a ghost town in more ways than one, though. Annabelle Stark, also known as Dirty Annie, was one of the last residents of the town. She lived there with her brother Tony Stark, who suffered from mental health issues. As the town started to empty, Annabelle and Tony were among the few who still remained, and Tony's mental state deteriorated further due to the isolation and lack of social interaction. He was often seen walking the streets, muttering to himself. Annabelle, caring for her brother, lived a reclusive life in their decaying family home. Dirty Annie Stark became something of a local legend, known for her resilience and determination to stay in St. Elmo despite its abandonment. Some reports suggest that Annabelle and Tony were eventually the very last two residents of the town, refusing to leave even when most of the buildings around them were completely empty. Today, this ghost town is said to be haunted by the ghost of Dirty Annie, still roaming the empty streets at night as its ghostly protector. And finally, we have Ardres-sur-Glane in France. The 10th of June, 1944 was a dark day for the residents of this quiet farming village. SS Major General Heinz Bernhard sent his troops in the Waffen SS Panzer Division to the village in retaliation against French resistance activity in the area. They wanted to send a message, so they destroyed the entire village and pretty much everyone in it. Even people just passing by the area were dragged into the massacre. In the end, only 6 people managed to escape. These victims were just civilians, mostly being women and children. People were taken to barns where they were down with machine guns. Others were loaded into a church which was set on fire. Anyone attempting to escape through the windows were gunned down. It was about as nightmarish as it gets. And today, what remains of the village still stands, left exactly as it was after the massacre. A haunting reminder of the atrocities that took place on that day.
If you enjoyed this video about abandoned ghost towns, then you have to check out this video next about abandoned military bases that you never knew about. Click the video now.